Tonight on Dispatches, we investigate the office of Mayor of London and ask if it's serving the needs of one of the world's great capitals.
When they pursue policies that are not in the interests of London or progressive politics, then I think we do have a problem.
This is the story of how the Mayor and his advisers run London.
They have their own agenda, which would be a communist revolutionary agenda.
The story of a man who treats those elected to hold him to account with contempt.
You casually use words to smear someone who's a giant compared with a midget like yourself, frankly.
A story of bizarre foreign alliances.
I love you.
I don't think it's appropriate for an individual authority to enter into bilateral relations with another country.
And the story of a mayor who believes it is acceptable to have the odd glass of whiskey at work.
No, it's not really acceptable, but Ken gets away with the unacceptable. That is Ken.
I therefore declare that Kenneth Robert Livingstone is duly elected the first Mayor of London.
When he was elected Mayor in 2000, Livingstone was an independent-minded breath of fresh air, beholden to no one.
I think one of the reasons I was elected mayor was because people in this city see a city in which public services have been neglected, investment has been neglected, and the quality of life is disgraceful for a major world city.
With substantial powers, this is a man who isn't afraid to follow his instincts on policy. I have to say I was impressed when Ken Livingstone won the mayoral election against the full might of the New Labour spin machine. He was a man of genuine independence and political conviction who would bring new ideas to London. The congestion charge was genuinely bold.
If you want to drive into central London, I believe you should pay for the problems you cause everybody else who has to use public transport or live there.
He also consistently argued the case with central government for Crossrail, a new east-west link for London.
City of London.
And his support for London's Olympic bid was crucial to winning.
I do believe that for London, the best is yet to come.
However, the headline successes have masked serious flaws with the office of mayor. Over the years, I became increasingly disillusioned, and I even came into direct conflict with the mayor over his policy of support for radical Islam. Now I fear that his particular brand of ideologically driven, headline-grabbing politics is not serving the best interests of Londoners. As mayor, Ken Livingstone has almost total power to do exactly as he wishes in certain specific areas. As chair of Transport for London, it is Ken Livingstone who has the final say over the running of the capital's buses, trains and road network. As the guiding force behind the London Development Agency, he controls which parts of London are regenerated. With a budget of £10 billion paid by taxpayers not just in London, but from all over Britain, and a City Hall staff of 732, his position is unique in British public life.
There's no doubt that the power within the Greater London Authority, this new government for London, lies absolutely and explicitly with the Mayor, and it was intended to.
Although approved by the Assembly, the Mayor has the power to appoint a coterie of unelected advisers. The salaries of Livingstone's inner circle cost us over £1 million a year, and they are accountable directly to the Mayor. Let me introduce you to a few of this group. John Ross, the Mayor's Director of Economic and Business Policy. Simon Fletcher, Chief of Staff. Mark Watts, Policy Advisor on Climate Change. And Redmond O'Neill, Director of Public Affairs and Transport. Livingstone's team is a close-knit group of old comrades. He has personally told me he can rely on them completely.
I think there's no question that the team that Ken Livingstone built around him, which others have called the Kenocracy, was very much based on people who'd worked with him before he became mayor.
They go way, way back with him. He's sort of grown up politically with them, and they stick together, and they close ranks around him. They seem to have come from some sort of left of Marxist background, and they form a coterie which is impenetrable.
The Mayor's key advisers, Redmond O'Neill, John Ross, Simon Fletcher and Mark Watts, are all former members of a left-wing organisation called Socialist Action. The Mayor's economic adviser, John Ross, who used to work for the Russian Communist Party, was Socialist Action's leader. He was quoted as saying, "The ruling class must know that they will be killed if they do not allow a takeover by the workers. If we aren't armed, there will be a bloodbath." The group met in this building in the 1980s and 90s and printed its magazine from here. Mark Wadsworth worked closely with Ken Livingstone on the left of the Labour Party at the time and was constantly in contact with Socialist Action and its members.
Socialist Action, as I understand it, describe themselves as the British representatives of the communist Fourth International based in Moscow. So I guess they would see themselves as the inheritors of the old international Marxist group, Mantle. John Ross told me he was the leader of Socialist Action, Redmond O'Neill his deputy. And I knew others, Anne Kane, Simon Fletcher. These were familiar names and faces. When electors vote for Ken Livingstone, they are voting for someone who is hugely influenced by Socialist Action.
Once these advisers were appointed to the Mayor's office in 2000, they continued to meet as Socialist Action. Atma Singh is a former member of the group. Until February last year, he was an advisor to the Mayor on Asian issues, but following an employment dispute, he left by mutual agreement. He took me to the pub where, in 2000, shortly after Livingstone became Mayor, Socialist Action discussed its vision for London.
What they thought they were doing was creating a city-state. They were creating this beacon of socialism as a state which they were running. They saw themselves as holders of political power in London.
Singh took handwritten minutes at the meeting and remembers what the group's goals were at the time.
Their whole thing was not necessarily to deliver social justice, but to make London more economically powerful so that they could have more power.
And what did they call this revolution they were planning?
The revolution in London, they called it bourgeois democratic. So it's like creating a nation state within London, a city-state.
So, to what extent was Ken Livingstone signed up to these kinds of ideas?
He did not object to Socialist Action pursuing their agenda as long as it coincided with him.
Once in these positions of power, it has been suggested that some members of the tight-knit group around the Mayor have not been following their job descriptions. Take Redmond O'Neill, the Mayor's transport advisor, who earns £121,360 a year. The GLA's website states that he is now responsible for transport policy and relations with the Transport Authority, Transport for London. Professor Stephen Glaister is a member of the Board of Transport for London. How much contact do you as TfL have with Redmond O'Neill?
Almost none.
Almost none? This is the man who is the Mayor's transport advisor?
He's the Mayor's advisor, the Mayor is chair of TfL. He talks to the Mayor, not to us.
I had virtually no contact with Redmond at all. And I'm sure that was deliberate because, in a way, the Mayor and his advisor go their own way. As the Transport Committee, I mean, I did occasionally get Ken in front of me, but Redmond was always in the background, very, very rarely came to the foreground, and I think I only met with him once in 5 years.
Isn't that rather peculiar, that someone who is supposedly driving transport policy, advising on transport policy, had no contact with the committee or its chair?
Yeah, you might very well say that.
Redmond O'Neill told us he is responsible for relations with TfL via its commissioner and senior managers. He does not represent the Mayor to the board. He insists he attends all necessary meetings. So what exactly are these advisers doing? Well, one of them has been using his office to smear a prominent political opponent.
If what you're saying is true, then I'm absolutely shocked by it.
In June 2006, the Mayor's Director of Equalities and Policing, Lee Jasper, commissioned some consultative work for the GLA. He asked this woman, Anne Kane, to do it. Kane is a former member of Socialist Action and a long-time associate of Ken Livingstone. Dispatches has obtained emails written by Jasper that show one purpose of Kane's work was to conduct research about Trevor Phillips to stop him becoming the head of the new Commission for Equality and Human Rights, or CEHR. On the 26th of June, Jasper wrote to Kane, "Can you draft a possible article outlining my opposition to TP, Trevor Phillips, becoming CEHR chair on the basis of his track record at the Commission for Racial Equality?" Kane agrees, as long as she will be paid. This idea had been brewing. 8 days earlier, Jasper had written to a colleague that we should develop a devastating critique of TP tenure at CRE, and that if he took charge of the new organisation, it would be like taking control of a train that is destined to crash, or becoming the captain of the Titanic. I showed these emails to the anti-racism campaigner, Suresh Grover.
I don't think the Mayor's office should be involved in discrediting any individual, never mind using public purse to discredit individuals, regardless of the position that they're going for. And of course the issue is that the position of the Commissioner for the Human Rights and Equality is a very pivotal position. But if that information is true, I'm just gobsmacked.
On the 5th of July, the research done by Anne Kane on Trevor Phillips was published in an article on this website, Black Information Link, part of a group of which Jasper used to be a trustee. A week after publication, Kane revealed her satisfaction at the article's effect. I have feedback that TP was rattled by Blink material. Apparently his candidature was being promoted as something that would please black communities, and the publicity indicated contrary to that. Dame Judith Mayhew Jonas, formerly an advisor to Ken Livingstone and previously head of the Corporation of London, has also worked closely with Trevor Phillips.
Well, I sat on the Equality Review set up by Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister with Trevor Phillips. Trevor is an outstanding candidate and was the most appropriate person to be appointed. I would be shocked if I thought that people actually spent public money in a campaign to discredit someone as good as Trevor. So if that is the case, then I'm upset to hear that, and I am very surprised.
Kane's full consultancy cost the taxpayer £14,400. Dispatches has discovered that her appointment was signed off by the Mayor himself. This was done retrospectively, waiving the usual code of practice for employing GLA staff.
What should the Mayor do in this kind of circumstance? After all, it's his name that's there signing off the employment of this individual to do this work.
Well, if he knew exactly what the work entailed, then I think he possibly owes Trevor an apology.
As Director of Equalities and Policing for the Mayor, Lee Jasper is paid £121,360 a year. Both Jasper and Anne Kane deny that their work was intended to discredit Trevor Phillips. Jasper also states that he was exonerated by an internal GLA investigation into the matter, which also accepted that the Mayor's retrospective appointment followed correct procedure. It is the presidential design of the Mayor's office that affords him the extraordinary power of retrospective appointment. Undermining opposition is all part of the Mayor's presidential style of government. Just like a president, the Mayor has been setting up embassies across the world. The Brussels embassy costs £415,000 a year. Chinese embassies, £350,000 a year. And in India, the bill is over £200,000.
Shot one, take four.
The Globetrotter and his staff have visited 17 cities across the world, and the Mayor himself has visited 11 countries since he was elected, exporting his own idiosyncratic brand of diplomacy. Here's his unique take on the Tiananmen Square massacre.
In the same way that Trafalgar Square's had an interesting history and past, not always a peaceful one, is a very clear parallel.
In April 2006, the Mayor led a delegation of 77 people to China. The flights and accommodation alone cost £145,000. His recent trip to India, with an entourage of 84 people, including the pop star Mylene Klaas, cost the taxpayer £740,000. The Mayor says these trips are necessary to drum up business for London.
People may think Does showing a mock-up of Big Ben have any impact? But it'll be on every news channel in India tonight, reaching over 1 billion people.
Even if this is the case, it seems difficult to justify some of the expenses involved. Dispatches has obtained full hotel bills for the Mayor's China trip. Livingstone spent £605.91 on room service. Also, on this approval form for the Mayor's credit card, there seems to be some confusion over what this £594 was spent on.
I think it's really important that people who do this on behalf of government or local government are prudent in the way they travel and can justify their expenses. There is absolutely no point in wasting money in this way, because it is the most obvious thing to be scrutinised.
The Mayor's argument for fostering trade relations with India and China is a simple one. These are the two fastest growing economies in the world. The same cannot be said for Cuba, which the Mayor spent £13,000 visiting in 2006, or Venezuela, where the Mayor is in the process of setting up yet another embassy. The Mayor and his team are spending significant sums of public money on foreign trips, some of questionable value to the people of London. In part 2, we investigate Livingstone's foreign policy and ask if anyone is really holding the Mayor to account. In part 1, we saw how Ken Livingstone and his advisers have been using the office of Mayor to attack opponents and create an international presence overseas independent of national government. These links with other nations have also led the Mayor into some rather strange deals, which he says are beneficial to London.
It is not that socialism failed. It is that socialism hasn't yet come. And we salute one of those people, and I invite him to address you, who is leading the struggle to build that socialism here in our 21st century. Please welcome the President of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez.
I love you.
On a recent visit to London, Hugo Chavez agreed a deal with Livingstone to provide London with £15 million to subsidise the fuel for its buses. In return, the Mayor's office would provide transport advice to Venezuela.
For Venezuela, their oil is cheap. For us, our expertise we've accumulated over a century is cheap. We're exchanging things which are cheap to each of us, but vital to the other.
The Mayor has sold the deal as a win-win situation for Caracas and London, but a closer look at the contract reveals that its benefits are questionable. The Tory MP Alan Duncan has worked for many years in the oil industry. The deal baffles him.
It is the Mayor's office providing services to Caracas in Venezuela, connected with a subsidy by Venezuela of transport for London's sort of diesel costs. Now, the effect of it is that actually you have got one of the poorest countries in the world subsidising one of the richest capitals in the world. I think this is immoral.
Venezuelan critics of Chavez are unconvinced that the deal is in the best interests of their country.
As a Venezuelan, I can assure you there are other priorities. You need to help the poor, those that are living under $2 a day or under £1 a day. We need to send those people food. We need to aid them to gain education, to improve their health conditions, and then think about roads.
Despite being a fellow socialist, the president of Chile is reported to have turned down a similar deal with Chavez because she told him it was bad for his own people. Livingstone has no such scruples. This leaked memo shows what the Venezuelan government really expected to get from the deal. The hope was to promote the Chavez regime on the side of London buses, as well as getting transport advice. That's London buses promoting a government with links to Iran and cocaine smuggling guerrillas, and accused of human rights abuses by Amnesty International. Doing deals like this was not what the man who set up the Mayor's office as Minister for London had in mind.
I'm not quite sure why Mayor Livingstone felt inclined to do this foray into international politics. I think it's a mistake. I think Mr. Chavez's regime in Venezuela has all sorts of questions to be asked about it, and I don't think it's appropriate in any case for an individual authority in this country to be trying to enter into bilateral relations with another country.
The mayor's extraordinary deal with Chavez is a very odd use of his powers. The way it was sold also makes no financial sense. The mayor is using the Venezuelan money to subsidise half-price travel for London's unemployed.
We estimate 250,000 Londoners will now benefit by having a half-price concession on the buses and trams.
Strong socialist stuff. If only his sums added up. If 250,000 people take up this fare cut, the cost would be more like £70 million, not the 15 million Chavez has donated. Almost £1 million of the money has already been spent on advertising the deal. You'd have thought, with maths like that, the mayor would have at least consulted the people who have to make London's transport budget balance. But the entire deal took Professor Stephen Glaister and the Board of Transport for London by surprise. How exactly did you find out about the Venezuela oil deal?
We heard about that the same way as everybody else did.
Through the newspapers? I mean, wouldn't it have been a little bit more proper for you to be informed in a more formal way?
Perfectly proper. It's the mayor's decision. It's not the TfL's decision. The TfL board does not approve that decision.
I mean, how typical is this of the way in which Ken Livingstone interacts with bodies such as yourself?
Entirely typical.
By making this alliance with President Chavez, the mayor appears to be putting ideology above the interests of London. What worries me is the way in which he and his advisers are prepared to impose their personal agenda on this city. In 2004, the mayor played host to Yusuf al-Qaradawi, a controversial Muslim cleric.
You are truly welcome. Welcome to London, a city of all faiths.
Al-Qaradawi's published views include the opinion that, through Allah's infinite wisdom, he has given the weak a weapon the strong do not have, and that is the ability to turn their bodies into bombs as Palestinians do. The way Ken Livingstone embraced this man on behalf of Londoners alienated some of his oldest allies. Peter Tatchell used to advise the mayor on gay and lesbian issues.
I've been a very strong supporter of Ken Livingstone for nearly 30 years. I think overall he has been a good mayor for London, but I do think there are a number of issues he's made some monumental misjudgments. When I questioned the rationale and the ethics of inviting Yusuf al-Qaradawi to London, the relationship with Ken Livingstone suddenly changed. Ken took the view that because I didn't agree with him inviting to London someone who is anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynistic, and who justifies terrorist suicide bombings, because I opposed that, I was an Islamophobe.
Tatchell was not alone. Journalists, campaigners, and many Muslims questioned the wisdom of al-Qaradawi's visit. The mayor's response was to spend nearly £6,000 of taxpayers' money on a report defending Qaradawi and suggesting the controversy was cooked up by a former member of the Israeli Secret Service.
He is surrounded by some advisors who come out of a history of very sectarian left-wing politics. They take a very black and white view of the world. You're either 100% for them or 100% against them. In many ways, they're like Bush. You know, exactly the mentality of Bush. Either you're for Bush or you're against Bush.
Like Tatchell, I've also locked horns with the mayor over his support for radical Islam and find his labelling of all critics on this subject as Islamophobes ridiculous. In November, I heard the mayor plan to launch yet another report, this time on Islamophobia in the media, at a press conference in City Hall.
They decided to take one whole week in the media cycle and analyse any article in the press relating to Muslims or Islam. The result was that 91% of the stories portrayed a negative image of Islam and Muslims.
I'd like to know how you can justify spending public money on this kind of work.
The Greater London Authority Act places a duty on the mayor to promote good race and faith relationships within the city.
The mayor says it's his duty to publish reports like this, but the document appears to me to be a thinly veiled pretext for launching an attack on his critics in the press. Some of the stories classed as negative could not have been reported sensibly in any other way, such as the London bombings and a driving ban for a boxing star who happens to be a Muslim. Can you say, hand on heart, that the report that you've published, that you're happy with it?
I mean, I'm not concerned, and I'm the only person to vote, so it's no great problem here. I mean, this work is commissioned by me. I am happy with it. I am publishing it.
The mayor may say he's happy with this report, which cost £31,700, but it was roundly dismissed in the press as oversimplistic propaganda. He is allowed to spend such large sums of public money like this because the mechanisms designed to hold the mayor to account are just not up to the job. When the institution of mayor was created in 1999, the government also formed a body called the London Assembly, made up of 25 elected politicians from around London. Its job is to scrutinise the work of the mayor.
I think what happened when the Mayor of London was being created is that the government at the time created an assembly to oversee the mayor that, frankly, is much weaker than it probably needs to be in order to hold the mayor properly to account.
When we arrived, and we had an induction, and we wanted to understand how the mass of civil servants, the officers who work for the GLA as a body, would operate in terms of their relationship to us and their relationship to the mayor, and how would they operate if we were on the same subject on opposite sides, you know, where would the Chinese walls be and all of that sort of stuff. So they produced a flowchart to demonstrate how this officer body, which is massive, would work. And it had this huge arrow from the officer body to the mayor, and this tiny little arrow from the officer body to the assembly. And thus it was.
The weakness of the assembly is that it only has one sanction, to reject the mayor's annual budget, but it never has. This allows the mayor to have the upper hand. For example, on the 13th of June last year, he defended his highly paid transport advisor Bob Kiley against criticisms he was being paid to do nothing whilst a recovering alcoholic. Livingstone was able to walk all over the elected members.
Those who are sniggering at the moment. Wait, and neither do all of you do the work you're paid for, given you're paid £50,000 a year to come in and do a full day's work. Most of you aren't doing that, and you're taking the money, and frankly that's almost fraudulent on the council taxpayer.
I think Ken Livingstone, as Mayor of London, quite often gives the impression he thinks many members of the Assembly are dunderheads. I mean, he just doesn't give them the kind of respect you might normally think that a leader of an institution like that might, but that's his personal style.
You casually use words to smear someone who's a giant compared with a midget like yourself, frankly, and so say the truth, admit it.
Some people might say, well, perhaps it's simply the case that you are not up to your job.
They would be entitled to draw that conclusion. They'd be entitled to certainly have that impression. We are there by the Act of 1999 to hold the mayor to account, to be the check and the balance. But in reality, we can't.
I think the Assembly tries its best, but it really doesn't have the appropriate power or the necessary people, I think, or the attractiveness in the role to attract the right people long term to perform scrutiny.
Outside the Assembly chamber, the mayor is cuddly Ken, always happy to turn up to a community event. But sometimes, even in public, a far less attractive side of the Livingstone character rears its head. Once more, it seems, there are very few checks on the mayor's behaviour.
What did you do before? Were you a German war criminal?
No, I'm Jewish. I wasn't a German war criminal.
Right.
I was quite offended by that. So how did
well, it might be, but actually you are just like concentration camp guards. You're just doing it because you're paid to, aren't you?
In 2005, Livingstone compared Jewish Evening Standard journalist Oliver Feingold to a concentration camp guard late at night after a party. When a complaint was made to the Standards Board of England, the only body able to discipline a mayor of London, they decided to suspend Livingstone. However, the mayor appealed through judicial review and was exonerated by the Court of Appeal.
I've never claimed that what I said wasn't offensive. It was meant to be offensive because I thought the behaviour of the reporter was offensive.
Livingstone was cleared. The Court of Appeal decided he wasn't actually acting as the Mayor of London when he made his comments.
Are there any genuine checks or balances on the power of the Mayor of London?
Nope. And I mean, and that's why he's so cheeky about it and thinks he operates with impunity. And if he tells a joke or he amuses the crowd, then he'll get away with it. And he does.
At times, the mayor seems to be a law unto himself, whether dismissing criticisms by assembly members he sees as an irritation, deliberately offending a journalist, or even face-to-face with the people of London. Several times a year, the mayor is obliged by law to face his electors in People's Question Time. I went down to Ilford Town Hall to witness this and was shocked by what I saw. Throughout the 2-hour public session, the mayor repeatedly drank from a glass of amber liquid after answering questions from the audience. We asked a laboratory to test the substance he was drinking. They confirmed it was 47% alcohol.
We noticed that the mayor was clearly drinking some other substance than water, and we've been able to ascertain that at this public event, very public event, he was swigging whiskey throughout.
I think there's a difference between having a glass of wine in the reception room before you go, which I'm sure Ken would handle perfectly right. How many drinks?
No, the evidence is that he had a large glass of whiskey throughout People's Questions.
Oh, OK. No, it's not really acceptable, but Ken gets away with the unacceptable. That is Ken.
People's Question Time was at 7 in the evening, but dispatchers also attended 2 mayor's question sessions held in City Hall at 10 in the morning in November and December last year. On both occasions, including this one on the 14th of November, he was also drinking whiskey. After one of these meetings on the 12th of December, he told a member of the dispatcher's team, "It's the whiskey that keeps me going. Otherwise, I just cough." Others we have spoken to confirmed that the mayor drinks at work, despite it being a clear breach of the spirit of the GLA's Code of Conduct. This states that staff should not knowingly take any non-medical substance, including alcohol, in the building that may affect their ability to work. The exceptional use of alcohol can only be signed off by, amongst others, the mayor himself.
He often would have a drink when he did Mayor's Question Time, when he comes before the Assembly. He would say it was for medicinal purposes, always, because it was in the morning. And I personally have met him in the lift with whiskey in his hand before noon.
The lack of accountability means that there are few controls over the mayor's behaviour. We've also discovered that there is little control over the billions of pounds spent by the mayor on London. In Part 3, we look at the organisation known as Ken's Piggy Bank, the London Development Agency, and ask whether some of the mayor's advisers are guilty of electoral malpractice. We've seen how the institutions designed to hold the Mayor of London and his advisers to account are not up to the job. When it comes to the London Development Agency, known in City Hall as Ken's Piggy Bank, the checks and balances are equally flawed. The LDA is designed to implement the Mayor's vision for regeneration. It distributes £575 million a year to promote sustainable economic development, much of it targeted at the city's poorest communities. To see how the LDA spends its multi-million-pound budget, dispatchers decided to look at some of the projects that it has funded in the last few years. The offices of Euronix Limited are in Stoke Newington. Dispatchers has learned that the LDA gave the company £150,000 between 2003 and 2004, but it never filed accounts. So this is the business address of Euro Limited. No evidence of any business activity at all, as far as I can see immediately from the outside. Excuse me, sorry. Is there a business here that operates from here? You're not. And the man from the shop next door seemed to have no idea either. We're looking for a company called Euronix. Have you heard of it at all?
No, I never heard of it. Not at all.
And how long has this business been empty, as far as you know?
It's been empty about 3 years now, as I can remember. I don't really remember anybody being here since I've been here.
Companies House records show that Euronix was wound up as soon as the accounts were due. We contacted one of the directors of the company, who lives in Israel, but he declined to explain why no accounts had been filed.
Filing accounts and those accounts being audited are key controls within the company's framework, and indeed that's part of the reason for having companies, that you have that accountability to shareholders. So clearly if accounts aren't filed on time, then that's something you should be concerned about.
Euronix is not an isolated case. A company in Canada Water called Women's Education in Building received £751,000 from the LDA, but went into liquidation just a year later. Between 2004 and 2005, the LDA gave Music City, based here, £40,000. Within 5 months, it ceased trading. Its financial accounts for that year remain overdue. Overall, according to the LDA's own figures, between 2003 and 2006, they gave more than £1.8 million to companies that have been struck off or have been liquidated. In several cases, the companies closed down in the same year in which the grant was given. The LDA has given money to 20 companies that are not even registered at Companies House, the Financial Services Authority, or the Charity Commission.
Well, I would have expected that there should be something in the monitoring agreement that would actually specify the company being set up by such and such a date. What one's looking for is that public money is spent on the purposes for which it's been allocated, and that value for money is being obtained.
There's also a question mark over the suitability of the projects the LDA chooses to spend its money on. Take, for example, Avsen Limited. In the financial year 2004-05, the LDA gave Avsen £10,000 to fund research into a vegetable oil-powered jet pod aircraft. The company's address is a PO box here. The company's website shows a glossy trailer of what the aircraft might look like. Investing in projects like this seems at odds with London's other needs.
When you look at what they're trying to do with upskilling deprived communities, I don't think they're getting to the actual people who really need the help. We're talking in the London boroughs, 1 in 4 people have no skills at all. Of that set, 6 out of every 10 are unemployed. So major problems, and I just don't think they know who to connect with.
The Economic Development Committee of the London Assembly recently commissioned this report into grant funding given by the LDA. It found a series of gaps in the LDA's records.
We weren't happy with what we saw, basically, and we called in some consultants to give us an expert view. They took the same view as we did, that the processes and procedures weren't great. To be honest, I really think in this particular incidence that the London Development Agency is about as transparent as a medieval secret society, and that's simply not good enough.
When Ducey suggested further investigation, the Mayor, in typical bullish fashion, poured cold water on the idea.
My guess is that for £15,000 you may get 5 days of a relatively senior accountant from a firm of that charging. There's no way they can do what you're asking. What are they going to do with files that will take a month to read? You should all have been accountants, I tell you.
Well, he tends, when he's under pressure, to try and throw something off with sort of a jocular comment. But it didn't wash. It transpired when I asked him that he hadn't actually read the report. It also transpired from what he said that he'd been very badly briefed.
The LDA told dispatchers that by investing in innovation and start-up businesses, there is an element of risk-taking. However, it pointed out that grants were allocated in staged payments to minimise exposure to business failures. The distribution of LDA money means the Mayor is failing to deliver on one of his key duties, regeneration. The Mayor's office has also spent money in other areas with little of the promised benefit to Londoners. Dispatches can show how the Mayor is spending large sums of taxpayers' money on selling his policies, some of which don't even work. In the last full year, he spent around £23 million on advertising and PR.
Can someone take another picture?
That's more than double what the Scottish executive spends, and £1 million more than Microsoft's UK advertising budget. The policy Livingstone is most identified with selling to Londoners is the congestion charge. Anyone who's ever used London's roads will know that congestion has been a problem for many years. In 2003, the Mayor introduced a charge for cars and trucks entering a congestion zone in working hours to try to solve it.
The only reason we're doing congestion charging is so that cars can speed up in London.
According to a GLA press release from 2004, the charge delivers faster, more reliable vehicle journeys and improved bus services. But today, a vast array of data indicates it's not achieving any of this. For example, one recent report using satellite tracking found that London was the slowest city in Europe, with an average traffic speed under 12 miles per hour. The Mayor has cleverly altered the way he sells the congestion charge to take account of this.
When the congestion charge was first introduced, Ken Livingstone made it absolutely clear that this was to reduce congestion. And indeed, in the early days, it clearly did. But there has been some degree of mission creep, I think it's fair to say, since then. And if you listen very carefully to the words that are used today, in fact, what is discussed is traffic reduction, fewer vehicles in the street.
We're 15% down, so that's a good reduction in the number of cars coming into West London.
That isn't quite the same as reducing congestion.
There's a reason the Mayor's keeping quiet about congestion these days. Fewer vehicles does not equal less congestion. TfL's own monitoring report in 2006 observed a long-term background trend of increases in congestion. This view is backed up by those who use the roads. Just ask London's delivery drivers.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing you do, just sit and wait.
Delivery vans like Len's contribute £5 million to the congestion charge every month. But they can't make any more deliveries than they did before it was introduced.
Initially, it did alleviate a small amount of traffic. It was less traffic within the congestion charge. But then over a period of time, I think people have just decided to pay it, and now I don't think it's made a lot of difference at all.
According to Transport for London's own statistics, the charge has only sped up journey time 2 seconds per kilometre.
It's about 2 hours to do about 18 miles, which is unbelievable.
Worse than the effect on Len's deliveries is what's happened to London's buses in the last 4 years. The congestion charge was designed to get us out of our cars and onto the bus.
Got to try and reduce the number of people driving in, get them onto buses, which is where the vast bulk of the people will switch to, and where we're laying on a huge increase in capacity.
More people are using the bus, but TfL's 2007 figures show that buses are travelling progressively slower every year, reducing their average speed by 11%. One of the other stated aims of the congestion charge is to make money available to reinvest in public transport. However, the charge has failed here too, due to outdated equipment.
It was a very simple, crude scheme technologically to guarantee it would work. The downside of that is it's quite expensive. No surprise there, but it is a fact that more than half the revenues are consumed in the operating costs.
In effect, little of the £8 congestion charge you pay to enter London is fed back into public transport infrastructure. London's transport is hamstrung by a lack of funding.
We've got to mend the roads, we've got to mend the underground, but there isn't enough money there to do everything that Transport for London would like to do.
And how do you think the Mayor's planning to pay for this?
Well, the Mayor, on behalf of London, of course, would like to persuade the national taxpayer to pay for more of it.
So who bails out Transport for London when there's a shortfall of cash? The Mayor would like us all to chip in. I'm now convinced that the Mayor's policies are being missold to Londoners. The Dispatches has discovered a far greater scandal. In the run-up to the 2004 mayoral election, Livingstone was required by electoral law to resign his post as Mayor during the campaign. The same laws applied to his advisers if they wanted to help him get re-elected. However, some of those closest to Livingstone failed to stand down and instead appear to have worked to support him from within City Hall.
We got an email from the Mayor's campaign office saying that we had to prepare briefings as if it were a normal GLA and to prepare them in the same format with the same rigour and so on. And then we were also expected to participate in trying to raise some money and generally encourage people to be as involved in the campaign as possible. So I was asked to raise money for Ken Livingstone from the Asian community.
These emails show that the Ken for London campaign instructed Singh and 2 other advisers to draft articles which were later published in support of the Mayor's re-election campaign. You were writing articles for his campaign, you were raising money for his campaign.
Yes.
You were organising supporters to work on his campaign.
Yes.
All while being paid by the taxpayer.
Yes.
And were you aware at the time, and were others aware, that this was not proper electoral practice?
I think very much so.
But you were a GLA employee?
Yeah, we all were. All of the people in the Mayor's, apart from the 3 people who stepped down, they were all GLA employees. And, clearly we were breaching the electoral guidelines in that respect.
Advisers Neil Coleman and Redmond O'Neill strenuously deny drafting any articles and breaching the electoral guidelines. We invited Ken Livingstone to respond to our specific claims, but he refused on the basis that he believed the programme was partisan and lacked balance. He said that he had not been given adequate time or sufficient detail to be able to respond to the programme's claims. Many of the people that I spoke to in the making of this film shared the same emotion: disappointment. Like me, they began as supporters of Ken Livingstone, but something has gone wrong.
I think the consequences are the missed opportunity of having a strong and an accountable mayor who can represent the whole of London. And that's very important when you're talking about one of the great world-class cities, which is what London is.
Perhaps it's a problem with the institution itself. Maybe anyone who held the post of mayor would have the same difficulties with accountability. But I'm just not convinced that this is the best way to run London.
Georgian London. Murder, blackmail and a possible scandal in City of Vice next.